Hi everyone, and welcome to another Heroes and Bosses video. This time I'm painting the Orc Fatties from Green Horde. I'm starting off by priming the orcs in grey, though any light color would also do fine. In the character art, these orcs have a lot of gums showing around their mouths, so I'm going to start off by using tanned flesh to paint the inside of their mouths and all around their teeth. I'm not too worried about hitting the teeth here. The main thing I'm trying to do is to get all around the base of the teeth with the flesh color. For the teeth themselves, I'm using Ceremite White. This is a base color, so it should do a good job of covering up the spots I hit with the tanned flesh. I'm going to be using Quickshade for these guys, so it's okay to go with a pure white for the teeth rather than, say, an ivory or another off-white. Now the teeth are somewhat poorly defined in this miniature, so we need to get a little creative with the white paint. For instance, it's hard to see any teeth on top, but I'm going to paint a white line across the gums and then draw in some canine teeth as well. I'm also using the white to paint a line representing the back molars. As I said, the teeth have no real definition here, but from a tabletop distance it's going to look just fine. Next, I'm going to use two different shades of green for the skin. I'm painting half of my orcs with Death World Forest and the other half with Ogryn Camo. This color covers the largest area of the orc, and it's going to take at least two thin coats so that it doesn't look patchy. There's a lot of folds and cuts in the skin, not to mention the facial details, so I'm using somewhere between a 2-to-1 and a 1-to-1 mix of paint and water. Once I get to the face, I'm going to leave a bit around the mouth painted with a tanned flesh color to make his lips more visible. The paint is thin enough that I can make a smooth transition of colors. Next, I'm going to repeat the process, this time using the Ogryn Camo. Now, while I still have the green skin colors on my palette, I'm going to paint the eyes using the Ceremite White. I like doing this before the Quickshade because it's much easier to fix mistakes. Next, I'm going to paint the cloth that's hanging from the orcs. These almost look like togas. I'm using two different colors for these. For the first two orcs, I'm using Doombull Brown. There's a few hard to notice places on the orcs where this cloth might be found. The first is in between the metal plates hanging on their chests. The other is the cloth that's around their necks. This could be treated like a separate piece of fabric, like cloth hanging from an army cap under a helmet, but I'm going to paint it the same color as the toga. For all the orcs with Doombull Brown togas, I'll be using Steel Legion Drab on their wrist wraps and foot wraps. Then for the other two orcs, I'll do the exact opposite, using Steel Legion Drab on the togas and then Doombull Brown on their hand and foot wraps. For all the bits of armor and the metal plates, I'll be using Pig Iron by P3. I'm a fan of this metallic color for a few reasons. First of all, if you're doing any true metal metallic effects, it's great for the darker regions of the metal. And maybe it's just because I use it all the time and constantly shaking it, but it seems to cover over other colors really well. The character art shows the orcs wearing what looks to be old, dark, and corroded metal, and this is great for that too. Now I'm switching over to some Screaming Skull for all the skulls hanging around the body of the orcs. These skulls have straps holding them onto the body of the orc. I'm just painting right over these. A lot of them are hard to see, so I'll have to just freehand paint some straps on them later. For the straps, I'll be using Dryad Bark. Some are easy to see, but for many of these, I'm just drawing lines across the skulls to give the impression of straps. There's also a few places where there's straps on the armor, like at the legs, the wrists, and the shoulders. I'm using the Dryad Bark on these as well. This is the last of the base colors on the model, and now I'm going to do the bases. These are the materials and paints I'll be using, along with a bit of sand. So here I'm starting off with a bit of Vallejo earth, just to give some texture to the base. This is faster and easier than painting on a base, which is handy if you're painting a ton of the same miniature all at once. Though, I do appreciate the time and effort put into a well-made base. So as you can see here, I'm just randomly spreading the earth texture around, and then I'm going to give it an hour or so to completely dry. Just to create a little more texture variation, I'm going to spread around some thinned down PVA glue and add a bit of sand to the base. After letting that dry, I'm going to paint some earth tones on the base. I'm starting off with Steel Legion Drab for the ground. Now I made the rookie mistake of using the same color for the togas and the foot wraps as the ground. So all around the areas that are flat or close to the orc's feet or the toga, I'm going to use Dirt Spatter from Army Painter. The Dirt Spatter is a much darker tone with a reddish hue, so it's going to be different enough to make the brown colors on the orc stand apart from the base. Next, I'm dry brushing with Karak Stone to make the textured regions stand out. And finally, I'm doing a second, brighter dry brush with Terminatus Stone. The last step before the Quickshade is to paint the rim of the base. I use a 1-to-1 mix of Eshin Grey and Abaddon Black for this. I'll let the miniature completely dry before starting the next step. So I always start off by dipping the miniature in halfway into the Quickshade, and then using a large flat brush to completely cover the rest of the miniature. I'm using Army Painter's Strong Tone for this because I like the strong contrast it creates in the final product. Once the miniature is covered, I'll switch to a smaller brush and use this to clean up the large pools of Quickshade and to uncover important spots, like the eyes and the mouth. I'm just wiping my brush off on a piece of paper towel that's off camera. Once I'm done, I'll give the orcs a day or two to completely cure, and then spray them with some Tester's Dull Coat to take out the shine. Now most of the time I would stop here, but for these guys I want to add a few final touches. I'm starting off by dry brushing over the armor with some of the original pig iron to bring back some of the metallic shine. You always want to do this after the matte varnish because the paint has a really hard time sticking to the glossy Quickshade. Next, I'm going to add a bit of rust to the armor and the metal plates using the following paints. I'm starting off with a thin layer of Typhus Corrosion. This needs to completely dry before you start in with the next color. For most of the orcs, I'm just putting some of the corrosion onto the metal plates, but for this one orc, I'm putting a bunch on his armor as well. I'm switching between brushing it on and stippling it in random places. first rust color I'm using is Mournfang Brown. I'm using a small flat brush to dry brush over the Typhus Corrosion. You don't need to cover every bit of it, but you definitely want to notice that it's there. You can see that it's making a nice reddish brown color on top of the textured corrosion paint. After that, I'm using Ryza Rust. I'm using this sparingly and just lightly dusting over the Mournfang Brown, or stippling it into the areas with the highest concentration of color. If some of your eyes didn't turn out as bright as you wanted them, you can go over them once more with some white. This is much easier the second time because you're just tracing over what's already there. Once you're done, you may want to give your miniatures another spray with some matte varnish. The final touch for these orcs is some blood. I'll be using Games Workshop's Blood for the Blood God for this. I'm starting off by mixing in a small amount of water to get it to sink neatly into the cuts on the body of the orc. After that, I'll use some of it straight out of the pot in other areas, like the hands where I want it to look thicker. After that, I'm just adding it in places where your average undead orc might get blood on itself. And here are the finished orc fatties. I'd like to give a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You're definitely a motivating factor in me getting these videos out faster, and your support will keep these videos coming. If you like this video, please give a like and a subscribe. If you want to be part of the decision-making process for which miniatures are painted next, or which new games you'd like to see painted, check me out on Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you very much for watching.